As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
Hello everyone and welcome to Nation Watch for the 8th October 2023. I'm honored to have in studio Mr. Rawle Lucas, who's an economist and an accountant by profession and who has served Guyana in many capacities at the very high professional level, including the GRA and the Guyana Power and Light Company, and many of us will know him as an educator at the tertiary level. Mr. Lucas, welcome to Nation Watch.
Thank you very much, Marvin. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, there's some exciting topics here that we're going to go through today. One of them, quite odd. Let me give some perspective to this. Recently, there was a bit of breaking news that the expenses claimed by ExxonMobil stood at $214.9 million US. Then there was a dramatic story coming out that it was reduced to $3.4 million. And all sorts of blame laying and so on took place. But then it took a former president and a former general secretary of the PPP to come out and say, look, all of this is happening and nobody is being fired. This is not good for us. And on the very next day, we read, which is today, we read that one Mr. Bobby Gosai Jr. will be disciplined. Interestingly, this statement from the Minister of Natural Resources, and I'm reading from the statement here, here's what he says. However, based on advice from Mr. Gosai that the initial claim of US $214.9 million was reduced to $3.4 million. I wrote the Guyana Revenue Authority on the 28th of November 2022 to confirm this figure by seeking a no objection. But then he goes on in the next paragraph to say that as recent as July 2023, the same Mr. Gosai, in a meeting with Vice President Jack Dio and IE, meaning Vikram Bharat, reported that the initial sum was reduced to 11.4 and then further went down to 3.4. So there's some complications here in what the Minister of Government is saying. And through all this, the Minister of Everything seems lost. Would you care to comment on the process and outcome as far as where we are today, based on public disclosure?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would admit that I myself saw the submission which was made by the Minister of Natural Resources with respect to the disputed 204 audit figure. In submission raises more questions than answers. And the further impression that I get is there's an attempt to, in my view, validate a culture of public management that will continue to cause the quality of public service in this country to diminish. We need to discourage this and prevent further decline of public service in this country. So, in looking at the comments that the minister made, here's why I'm holding the view that I hold. You see, the scandal involved the risk of loss of between 203 to 211 million US dollars to this country. You may recall that in 2005, Guyana had a flood,
Yes.
and the severity of that flood was expressed in figures of about 469 million Guyana dollars. It was almost 59% of the GDP of the country at that time. So if you look at that 214 million US dollars and the 211 that we could lose, we're really talking about losing 30% of the 2005 GDP of this country. If at that time the concern about the impact of the flood was so great, then why isn't the concern about the loss of this money, the potential loss of this money to the people of this country, not being considered with the same degree of severity? So the minister's submission told us that the government was formally informed in November 2002, as you said, that the 214 had been reduced to $3 million by Mr. Gosai. Now, somewhere later down in his letter, the minister said that 214 was always the position of the government.
Yes.
And therefore, I am surprised that with Mr. Gosai telling him in November of 2022 that this money had been reduced to $3 million, that he would not have asked Mr. Gosai to explain what had changed. And secondly, for him not to perhaps have informed his boss, the second vice president of this country, who says he has full control over the oil and gas industry in this country. If you know that your government's position is $214 million, why would you entertain a remark or a statement coming from Mr. Gosai that it had been reduced to $3 million and you didn't ask him what happened? And Mr. Gosai probably didn't give you an answer. Hence the reason why you had to write GRA to find out, what happened. Something is obviously not right here. So you have to ask a question. Knowing that the second vice president is in charge of this issue, and you know this person, wouldn't it be appropriate for the minister to pick up the phone and call that guy and ask him if he was aware of $10, in October or November when you wrote that letter to GRA? It's logical. So we need to understand from the minister, perhaps in another letter, or another submission to the press, if Mr. Gosai was asked these questions and what explanation he gave. I think that's the only way the public will feel comfortable with the attempt to resolve this matter. And I believe that it is an insult to this nation, really, to tell us that in July, the minister and the VP were informed in July this year,
Yes.
almost 8 months after Mr. Gosai would have reported that this thing had fallen to $3 million, and knowing that 214 was your position, then, how come Mr. Gosai could be telling you that this thing fell initially to $11 million, and then it dropped further to $3 million, and nobody asked Mr. Gosai why there was a contradiction in his story? Then, why did nobody ask him, why is there a contradiction? Because he told the minister in November last year that it was $3 million. Now you're sitting in front of the VP and the minister, and you're telling them, well, it came down to 11 and now it's down to 3. And those two persons claim to have the position that the money should always be 240 million. And that gentleman is telling you in July, we are now in October, 3 months later, you are now trying to address this matter, something that had such a significant impact on your economy, that given our current GDP, that's about 4 or 5% of our GDP. It's more than Gaisuku is contributing to this country. It is more than rice is contributing to this country. It is more than, some of the big manufacturing companies in this country are contributing to the economy of this country. And this man is causing that much loss from our economy, and he's not being asked questions. He's not being challenged at that time. We waiting until now to say that this is a problem. Are you really telling me that? That neither the VP nor the minister asked this guy questions at that time when they heard this, knowing that their position was always 240? So.
But it appears to the curious onlooker that this is really some theatrics. Somebody cried out that nobody was being punished. That person is believed to wield some influence, and then the next day somebody is put up on that sacrificial altar there. When it appears as though those negative consequences should be somewhere much higher up than where they've been applied.
Well, the point I'm making to you is, if you as a cabinet minister know that your government's position is that we must get our $214 million from that audit, if you know that's your government's position, and the only people who should be changing that figure, or at least telling you they can accept the change to that figure, is GRA, and somebody is telling you that in November, and you haven't asked that person how it is that that number has fallen? Are you telling me that in November 2022 that this guy was not asked what changed? Explain the change to us? And if he couldn't explain it, are you telling me you're going to write GRA asking for no objection instead of asking GRA for an explanation? Is that what you're telling me?
That's clearly what is being conveyed, and therefore the negative consequences need to be applied much higher at the level of cabinet, in my view.
It's quite, nobody would have disagreed with that perspective at all.
But what we are at a crunch in this country now, the crunch time, where the teachers are lobbying for greater, or not greater, but for a livable wage, where the nurses are migrating, the doctors are migrating, the sugarcane workers are complaining that they are working for $2,500 per day when the government of Guyana is competing with itself for labor at the level of the housing sector. People are earning more, and the sugar workers are gravitating towards construction and so on. And there's that crunch, and the rising cost of living is hitting everyone really, really hard. And here it is, this huge sum of money now seems to be in question and doubt. Should Guyana lose this money, how hard will it hurt us?
Well, as I indicated earlier, it represents about 4 to 5% of the GDP that the government expects this economy will generate this year in 2023. And as I indicated earlier, if you were to compare that loss to the contribution that comes from a number of companies in this country, VDL, Sterling Products, Republic Bank, Demerara Bank, SDIH, Anson McCall, and those people. Its loss is greater than the individual contribution to GDP, any one of those companies. And they are significant companies in this country that that make a significant impact on this country. And you're telling me that you would adopt a very nonchalant attitude towards this situation, where you understand, at least your people who should understand the magnitude of the risk that this guy was putting the country at. Now you're telling me that it didn't matter to you, you can afford to treat it, casually? Doesn't make sense.
Comment on the issue of process. Should there not be a properly defined, documented process for handling these matters? And should there not be a checklist at strategic places in that process to ensure that there's full compliance and there's a back-end check to ensure that nothing goes wrong? And is there any indication that such a process exists and is being overridden or ignored?
Well, I'm not privy to the internal procedures of the Ministry of Natural Resources. But again, if you were to read the letter that was, or the submission that was made by the Minister of Natural Resources, he said that the ministry's role was to facilitate the exchange of information and documentation among the relevant parties, including the GRA. So it seems to me, based on that, that their role was to ensure that, all the relevant parties, GRA, Exxon, and so forth, were able to get whatever information was needed for them to resolve this matter properly. So, if that was the role that this gentleman was supposed to play, and he was able to persuade Exxon that he can do more than the government might have told him or told them, was the extent of the interaction that he should have with Exxon. And he actually engaged in a discourse about numbers with these people, then Exxon also needs to be held to account, because they must know, if there was a letter sent to them telling them what role this guy will play in trying to resolve this particular situation, for them to engage with him in negotiations and not the GRA, and for them to arrive at a $3 million figure with this fellow, then one has got to ask the question, so how is it that Exxon was actually able to sit with this guy, or believe that they should sit with this guy and arrive at and negotiate this arrangement?
Mr. Lucas, something is really, really messy here. I mean, I know that you are not going to perhaps it from your choice of language and so on, but here is this paragraph in this release. And it's written in the first person, and the writer is the Minister of Natural Resources. I wish to restate, I'm quoting, I wish to restate that the position of the government of Guyana today remains consistent with its original position, that the only authority to make a final determination is the Guyana Revenue Authority. Yet, Mr. Gosai, Yet Mr. Gosai is advising at a meeting Vice President Jagdeo and Minister Vikram Bharat on this matter, when the same minister saying the final arbiter in this matter is the Guyana Revenue Authority. I'm trying to make sense of the minister's logic, or help me please, help our viewers.
Well, I will not attempt to try and speak for the minister, because I'm like you. I'm at a loss as to how you can know your government's position of being $240 million, and somebody tells you this thing is coming down to 3 million, and you don't question that person at that point in time. Even if you decided to write GRA for confirmation, his missive doesn't say that. His missive says that I'm writing for no objection.
Yeah.
And a no objection implies that they accepted that position.
And they meaning the ministry.
The ministry accepted that position.
Yeah.
So, because he's conforming a no objection by GRA. But if you knew at that time that your government's position was 240, you should really be asking GRA to explain to you how it is that the number came down from 240 to 3. Because naturally, you would want the public, which would have already heard that $240 million were likely to come to the government.
Right.
You would want to put yourself in a position where you can explain to the public how it came down to $3 million. Even if you don't want to give the public the full details of the matter, the fact is you ought to inform yourself. And it is clear from what this submission is saying, the government did not inform itself. Why it didn't seek to inform itself is the question. And I believe that question ought to encourage others to probe a little more as to how we arrived at this situation.
The denials sound very hollow from where I sit, I must confess.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's time for some cabinet resignations. If indeed Guyana were a truly democratic country with practicing democratic norms, and if Guyana were a place where management responsibility for state assets was an issue that was being taken very, very seriously, I think automatically some resignations would have flowed, and I still hope that a couple of them will be forthcoming.
Yeah. Well, I think before you close on this matter, I would say it is also pertinent to ask GRA if it knew it was not changing its position from 240, why it took them so long to inform the government, over 8 months.
Over 8 months, yes.
To inform the government, if it knew it was not changing its position, and it would have received in November 2022 a letter from the minister asking. So GRA itself ought to be asked some questions so that we can close the loop on the information in relation to this matter. So to me, the submission that was made today in the Chronicle by the Minister of Natural Resources poses more questions than answers.
But I have one further question on this issue. With all that is happening around this 214 expenses and the talk of conciliation, what are the possible consequences contractually for the government of Guyana, ExxonMobil?
You mean in terms of this particular
issue here?
This particular issue? Yeah. Well, I don't understand what contractual implications it would have beyond the fact that we are applying the provisions of the contract to conduct the audit, and whatever finding comes out of the audit, agreed finding comes out of the audit, then that is what should be applied. So I really don't see a contractual challenge. I mean, the contract has the provision for the audit to be done. The audit has been done, and it's a question now of settling the disputed amount. That's all.
But there ought not be disputes considering that the audit is signed and sealed.
Yeah, well,
All right, so from one calamity to the next, as the old people would say.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about another area that you were involved in, the Ghana Power and Light Incorporated. You served a couple of years as chairman, 1 year as chairman of the board. There is talk now from the executive branch of government that the coalition while in government never invested in GPL, never maintained for 4 years and more the assets of GPL, and so are responsible for the major power challenges that the nation faces today. With, several days of blackout in Bartica, and then the generator moved from Essequibo to Bartica, resulting in more blackouts in Essequibo, and just a slight slowdown in Bartica, shut down all over. And then there's this very strange pronouncement by the executive as well, that large corporate entities with self-generating capacity will be asked to support the efforts of GPL and by extension the government by going on self-generating facilities from 6 in the afternoon to 10 in the night. And if they do not comply, then they will have no choice but to remove them from the power supply grid for that period of time. Comment firstly on the issue of the allegation that the coalition government failed to maintain for 4 years and never invested in GPL.
First of all, let me say that I think Minister Patterson, former Minister Patterson, has done a very excellent job in identifying, if not all, of what was done by GPL under the, or during the tenure of the APNU-AFC government, who we may call the coalition government, 2015 to 2020. But as you know, I was appointed chairman of GPL May of 2019. Government changed in August of 2020.
Right.
So I had basically a year plus, and a few months, to work with GPL. During that period, prepared what is called a development and expansion plan. The license that GPL has to operate, to generate, transmit, and distribute power on the coastline of Guyana, and the Electricity Sector Reform Act that governs the existence and behavior of GPL, both require GPL to produce these plans, and they have to do it on a rolling basis, which means every year the plan has to be updated. So we did a plan when I got there covering 2020 to 2024. In that plan, we had short-term goals, and medium-term goals, and we had long-term goals. Our short-term goal was to cover the year of 2020 with both what we call traditional power generation. I'm going to talk more or less about the traditional power generation because the renewables could be a little because of the amount of background work that is required to get that done. But with respect to generation, I did 46 megawatts. We're going to invest in 46 megawatts of power for Garden of Eden. And part of the reason we were doing it was Garden of Eden at that time had a stated capacity of 22 megawatts. Those generators that were at Garden of Eden put in since on the the Barnum period in government. So you could imagine, what sort of condition they would have been in at that time. And so we decided we could not tolerate, the performance that was coming out of that system. And so we decided we were going to upgrade with the 46 megawatts. We went to the ministry. Well, we were searching around for funding, and we were unhappy with the various options that were in front of us. We looked in the private sector, and we looked at some of the regional financial institutions, but we were dissatisfied with the cost of borrowing. And so we went to the government of Guyana. And we were able to get from the government of Guyana $50 million US, a commitment of $50 million US for us to make that investment. Turned out, while we were doing that, COVID was becoming an issue. And so, and I have to give credit to GPL, the management of GPL at the time, as well as the APNU government. Because when we made the case to them and showed them that, look, if we moved ahead now with this investment, we were likely to beat any constraints that would arise through the global action that was being taken to protect people from the pandemic, from the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was a good thing that the government understood, and it enabled us to sign a contract with Wärtsilä, because they were the suppliers of the generators, in, I think it was April, and we were able to get them, and by doing that, we were able to maintain ourselves high up in the line of orders that Wärtsilä had for new generating capacity around the world. Mm-hmm. So by doing that, we were able to get those generators in here before, transportation and other supply chain issues became a problem. We got them in. And we also were able to get Nabi Construction to start the civil works at Garden of Eden, because we had to change up the foundation. We had to lay new foundations because we were getting 5 generating machines that would, require a different kind of platform. Because the thing about those machines, and I think this is something people need to understand, those machines are dual fuel machines. What that means is that we can use the traditional bunker-C fuel, the heavy fuel oils that we use right now, or we can use gas.
Meaning natural gas?
Natural gas that Exxon has out there, that is flaring out there. We said we would do that because we were aware that the conversations were taking place between the government of Guyana and Exxon about where to land the gas pipeline in the country. And we said at least what we want to do is to put GPL in a position where once gas is coming to shore, we could start using it. And so we brought in the dual fuel equipment. All of that happened in 2020, before I left office. So I do not understand where the person who is making this remark, and I did see in a DPI release that the second vice president was credited with this false statement. And so I really don't understand why this government would do something like that, knowing fully well that it could be disproved. Why would they go out there and tell the world and tell the people of this country that the coalition government did nothing to improve the electricity situation?
It's interesting that they would do that because the ordinary citizens of this country are saying to you loudly every day that they have not experienced the kind of power outages that they're experiencing now between 2015 and 2020, that the GPL was better managed. And that's the kind of review that is coming from the people in their homes, you know, who at this time when there's a greater demand for electricity, given the temperatures, the rising temperatures and so on, that's the review we're getting from ordinary Guyanese in their homes, from the places of work and in the streets and in the markets. So it is, well, anyway.
No, I think what you need to recognize is this, and I need to make this point. As I said, we had short-term, medium-term,
Yeah.
and long-term plans.
I was going to the point of asking you to elaborate a little bit on the medium-term plan and where we are as a country now, where GPL as a corporation is at the moment, whether they are working with that plan, whether they have dumped it, what is responsible for us being where we are in terms of energy supply to the nation, when in fact a plan existed that would have lifted us out of this kind of crisis situation or prevented us from being there.
Well, I cannot say why this government chose the course of action that it took. But I can tell you, our plan had suggested that in 2021, we would have made additional new investments in another 55 megawatts of power. We were going to do another 46 and another 9 in Canefield up in the Berbice area. That was our intention. So that by then we would have invested and brought on stream almost 101 megawatts of new investment in power generation in the country by 2021. And by 2022, we were going to add another 120 megawatts, so that we would have been adding 221 new megawatts of power. You heard this government saying that it only has 180.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody
And that includes the 46.5
that we would have
right.
brought in. So anybody who do math would see that you had at least, we would have had by now in 2023 as much as 42 additional megawatts of power in this place. Because they're at 180 and we are at 221. So we would have had 221.7. So we would have had about, 41 to 42 additional megawatts of power. So you would not have been experiencing blackout. You would not have been experiencing blackout.
You had a projection of total new investment moving to 424 megawatts by 2026 end.
Yeah, that's our long term. But the point I'm making to you is in 2023, when people are experiencing what they're experiencing now with respect to the power outages, would not have happened because we would have had enough capacity in there to take care of the demand as it was growing. You know, one of the things that the management under the APNU did at GPL was they improved, in my view, the estimation that GPL made with respect to future demand for electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that by acquiring software, suitable software that allowed for load loss and I can't remember the terms now. I haven't been looking at these things.
Yeah.
It's not my. But the point I'm making is that they acquired technology to enable them to improve their estimation of future demand for electricity in this country. And so I am fairly confident that had we been able to continue doing this work, we would have covered the demand that was required at this particular point in time for electricity in Guyana. There's an additional point that I want to make here, and that point relates to the self-generators.
Mm-hmm.
Our plan took account of the possibility of self-generators coming back onto the grid. It's a variable that is included in the estimates that we made in our development plan. It's part of it. So I am surprised that these fellows are going to come now to tell self-generators that you can't come back onto the grid, when if they had followed the work that we had done, it would have been possible for them to come back onto the grid without there being too much difficulty for the system to accommodate them.
But all of this is saying to us, Guyanese, that there is a serious management deficit at GPL.
I don't know if it's at GPL. I don't know if it's at GPL. The problem might lie somewhere else.
Policy maybe.
Yes, the problem might lie somewhere else because, as I said, GPL has to develop these plans. And in reading some of the statements that representatives of this government have been making, you see them talking about numbers that were not necessarily consistent with what we're doing. And I think there's an article in yesterday's Cultural News where the commentators were questioning, the capacity that these fellows, this government is trying to develop and acquire in this country using hydro of 165 megawatts, gas to shore of 300 megawatts. There's already 465 megawatts than what you already have.
Problem solved.
No, what you already have. So the question then becomes, who is using all of this and when? Who will be using all of this and when? So you would be actually paying for the excess capacity. So you will not necessarily be bringing down the price of electricity in this country. Under the constructive conversations about what we can be doing for the people of this country, I think is why we have the problems that we have right now.
Look, you have outlined in great detail this plan that the Guyana Power and Light Inc. had. This plan was developed by GPL. So it means that at least at the management level at GPL, this plan is known to them. If it is that the the reinstated old leadership at GPL is ignoring this plan, it can only amount to lack of appreciation for the work of the staff, or ignoring the needs of the nation.
By whom?
By the particular reinstated management.
I remember GPL has a shareholder. It's the shareholder who makes requests. Shouldn't necessarily blame GPL's management. There's a shareholder, and the shareholder of GPL, 100%, is the government of Guyana, you and I. The only problem is you and I don't get a chance to make our voices heard, so that our shareholder representative, speaks to the institution in a way that allows our interests, and the needs of the people to be addressed. And this is obvious in what is going on right now in the industry.
What is coming across clearly here, Mr. Lucas, in the two issues that we've discussed, is that it's easy for us, the citizens, and it's easy for the government to blame persons who are not responsible for what's happening. In Mr. Gosai's case, it appears to be a situation where the responsibility lies higher up, and ought to have been made, decisions ought to be made higher up. In fact, there's evidence that decisions have been made higher up. And in this case, listening to you based on your knowledge of what's happening at GPL at least happened during your tenure, it is becoming clearer and clearer that, the management of GPL is going to be blamed by us continually, while those who make the decisions at the level of executive government can join in the blame so that they can
No. That would only happen if you don't speak up.
Well, you haven't spoken up now. Our viewers are aware of things that they have not been aware of before this minute.
No, well, I spoke up because I was involved and I wanted to help set the record straight. But I'm saying, as a political group that is being accused of mismanagement, and you have the information to clear the air and make it known that that is not so. I mean, I think it was the 29th of December 2019. President Granger went to Bartica to open the new station generating plant that we had built in Bartica.
Yeah. And the generating set was since removed.
I don't know what happened since, but
this is the
after my
information,
departure. But
this is the information we're receiving, that the generating set was removed from Bartica, and that resulted in severe power outages in the community, in the municipality.
I didn't keep up to date with it. But the point I'm making to you is, I mean, there were newspaper articles.
Yeah.
All of this about the president going to Bartica to open this new plant, this new investment, and for this government to stand before the people of this country and tell them the nonsense that it told them is sad. Honestly, it's sad.
But not unpredictable. In the remaining few minutes, Mr. Lucas, I want to ask you to comment on this particular issue, the investment climate in Guyana. You have been doing articles on what's happening on the stock exchange and so on, and the numbers don't look encouraging. If there's an increase in trading, it's below 0.25%, and there's continuous slippages, and where are we going? What is this information saying to the public about the climate for investment in Guyana, the interest of investors in Guyana? What are these numbers saying to us, particularly in the non-oil sector of the economy?
Well, you know, the research is still ongoing with respect to that. But what I can say is, you know, that I produce every week and it's published in the Stabrook News. Is considered a leading indicator of what will happen in an economy. There might be a debate among academics as to the extent to which one could rely on the index to make these predictions about the future behavior of the economy. But, you know, experts and, you know, investors who are well honed in the industry tell you that the stock index can give you an indication of what will happen in the future in the country. And I have to tell you that since July last year to now, stock market in Guyana has lost about 20% of its value. That much. For this year alone, from January to now, to the most recent, which was this week, most recent trading period, which is this week, Monday, gone. We've already lost nearly 9% for the year. So for almost an entire year then, what we're seeing is that the market is declining instead of improving. Values of some of our major companies like Banks DIH, like DDL, like the Demerara Tobacco Company, you know, others, I can't remember them all right now. They are declining in value. They're declining in value. And that is an indication that something is wrong. I mean, if our traditional industry, because industries that I have in the index are all would be considered old industries again, the traditional industries or companies participating in various industries in Guyana. And this is what's happening to them. If you look at your report, however, you will see that even though the economy has grown by this huge amount, it's primarily because of oil. Those activities that are supporting the investment in the oil industry. But we are continuing to do some research to see exactly what's happening. But take a look, compared to last year, the first half of last year, and you compare it with the first half of this year, there are about 9 of the 28 industries you have in this country that the government reports information on. 9 of them have declined in growth. So we have growth that is increasing at a decreasing rate. That's what we are seeing right now. And that's what your half-year report tells you. And these are significant industries, including the auto crops industry, which was the largest industry, single largest industry in this country up until oil took over. It was larger than gold, larger than construction, larger than wholesale and retail trade. It was the largest, single largest industry in the country. Great. It's increased, yes, in 2023, first half of 2023, but at a significantly slower rate last year. And that is the case in about 8 other industries of some significance to this country. And those are industries where a lot of ordinary Guyanese make their transportation, wholesale and retail, and so forth. Healthcare, education, they all decline. Take a look. It's their report. Take a look. And you will see that is what's happening to us right now. So, you really have to wonder sometimes the degree to which these people understand the needs of the people of this country. And if they think just jumping up with an initiative here or an initiative there that is not necessarily connected to the fundamental aspects of the economy would make a difference. I don't know what else to say. Persons who are willing to talk, who are willing to discuss these things and are willing to find solutions are perhaps the people we should be looking to, to get out of the situation in which we currently find ourselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rawle Lucas. Viewers, thank you very much for joining us today. Mr. Lucas, you have touched on a number of very, very important points, and you have made some revelations to the people of this country and beyond. I want to thank you very much for joining me on Nation Watch and making this conversation possible.
Well, thank you very much, Marvin. It was a pleasure of mine to be here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this edition of Nation Watch for Sunday, 8th October 2023. And thank you very much for staying with us. We are counting down to Christmas. As we are counting down to regional and general elections, be alert, stay focused. If Guyana is to grow, the PPP must go. Until we meet again, God bless.
Good.